So this lesson we learn about the loops and their uses. After we learn about different type of exceptions. Exceptions mean some kind of errors and how we handle in our programming. And third, how we use these loops in programming languages. And after that, we learn about the exceptions. We will learn how the use of these exceptions and how the programming executed after that. So all these topics we learn about that. So loops and their uses in programming. There are some loops: while loop, do while loop, for loop, if else loop. So these are looping structure. We learn this session with the examples. Also we learn about different kind of exception handling and how the exception handling is important in our programming. After, how these exceptions we will use in our programming at the runtime. There are two type of error finding techniques. One is compile time, second is runtime. So there are right in the PPT showing the loop. How the loop is nothing just but many time a same kind of code we write in program that minimize the usage of that. Loops and exception handling are the two important concepts in programming that help is making code more efficient and robust. Loops allow us to execute a piece of code multiple times. We don't write any code in multiple times with the help of loop. Loop is just some kind of in types. There are many loops we are using, like while loop, do while loop. So these loops are using to minimize our code which is writing in multiple times, while exception handling help us to handle error. Error means any code when we write in programming that effect in our code, in our programming. And there is also some errors, like we use any kind of arithmetic operations and we divide there by zero. So we all know if we divide any number by zero, that means the answer is infinity. So infinity is not just answer. So this is a error code. So we can predefine these kind of errors in our programming code, so that may help us to prevent these kind of errors. So these kinds of errors we will conclude in our code before executing, so that we confirm which kind of error, yeah, which kind of exception we can handle prior to the exactly the error is executed. So a loop A loop is a control structure that allow a program to execute a set of instructions. Means this is loop section. So loop section is a body section which use a code. If we write in multiple times, not required, but just we use a condition there. If the condition is true, that's mean we continue follow the loop condition. If the condition is true, we just out from the loop. We will also. Yes, I know my face is not real because of my webcam. 1.5 week, my laptop webcam is not working properly, so that it's not affecting our lecture. So that is doesn't matter. You just read all that kind of data. No, no, no. It's okay. Just ignore that. The primary purpose of a loop is to reduce code redundancy. Redundancy means if we don't require multiple times to writing a code and execute a block of code multiple times with different data or input values. There are several types of loop in the programming languages. We are we are learning in this In these looping programming, there are some kind of loop we are using in our programming code. These are the for loop, these are the while loop, these are the do while loop, and these looping structure are different, but they how they executed, what the condition they follow, we will check in this code. So this is the DFD, data flow diagram for any programming code, where we start our code with some kind of has include like definitions of the programming languages. After that we conclude any arithmetic and logical operations, and in that operations we required many kind of codes. But when we have many same line of code, that means we don't write that code multiple times. Instead we use loop. There are many type of loop: for loop, while loop, and do while loop. So these are condition checking statement, means these are looping structured. We follow that. If any condition, like I write here, if 10 greater than n is any number is greater than 10, that means if this term is true, that means we will follow this structure continuously. If this condition is not true, we conclude this statement, we conclude this programming, and just run, and we conclude the statement. So there are also some C level language code. So here is an example of this simple multiple times why we need loop. So if we write a programs to use hello world in multiple times in our output, so that we required print a function in 5 times, we write a hello world in our screen in 5 times. So that means we required to write printf function in 5 times. Just it, this program we also conclude with the help of loop. So just look at the another program where we use loop. So we just write a number integer I equal to 0, and we want to write hello buddy how many times? 5 times. So we start a looping structure while loop with where the value of I is always followed by 5. If the value is 4, that means we write the hello world start from 0. So 5 times we follow the hello world, and we incremented the I value with the 1. So there are just 5 line of code, but in previous code we write 5 time printf function. So looping is used to reduce the code structure, to efficiency, to maintain efficiency of that code. So the explanation of this code: first statement is printf function which print hello world. Second statement is ith value with the increment operator. We will conclude. We also learned in previous session there are many type of operators, arithmetic operators. There are two types of them: some operator and some operands. So we follow these kind of values, and we increase these values with the help of increment operator or plus operator, that called arithmetic operator. There are some other loops how we follow. There are four loops. Four loops have ternary operator. We learn many types of operator. Which operator have only one operand, means we have only one value, and that uses with any operator, that means it is a unitary operator. If we use two different operand, that means it is use binary operator. And third one is when we use three operands, that means this is ternary operator. So loops are a fundamental construct in programming language and have a wide range of application. Some of the applications are here: traversing array. When we learn about data structure, so there is a array. Array means the continuous memory allocation. For we also learn in a previous sessions what is array. Array is a different type of data type where we use an array. Array means we use same data type in a continuous memory location. So we use array. Iterating through files, we also saving, yeah, storing our files. We use the loops. We also use in input validation. We use loops in animation. We use loops in numerical computations. That mean all that application are uses loops, programming loops. So basically two types of loops. Some is exit control loops, some are entry control loops. So in entry control loops, the control statement is written right at the beginning of the loop. This type of loop is also called a pre-checking. Pre-checking means we just check before the code and we check after the writing the code. That means entry control loops, and we write any loop code after the programming, so that called exit control loop. The condition in control statement are checked at first, and only if the condition or true, the body of the loop is executed. If the condition is false, we will not use this code to be executed. So first we check if condition is true in any control structure, any control loop, so that we need not need to conclude the body section of that programming. If the condition turn out to be false, the line of code in the body of that loop will not be executed. There are second type of loop, exit control loop. Exit control loop are a type of loop structure in programming where the loop condition is tested after the loop body has executed at least once. If we just write any code, we use any exit control like do while loop. So the condition we first check pre-section pre-check, and after that the code is executed. After we also check the second condition, that called a exit control loop. There are some kind of loops. First one is for loops. A for loop is a loop that run a The loop use a counter variable to keep track of a form number of iteration and its set of condition to control the loop. So we check how the for loop is used. For loop always some statement, some condition, some execution part. There are some three type of ternary operator they are using in for loop. While loop, we also have some example of that kind of loop. While loop is a loop that continue to repeat a as long as a certain expression is true. The expression is evaluated before each iteration of the loop, and if it is true, the loop is continued. Third one is do while loop. If you have a question, what is the loop in the any programming languages? So there are two type of loop: intersection loop, entry control loop, or exit control. There are some types, there are some example of that loop is for loop, do while loop, infinite loop, nested loop, go to statement. These are the types of any loop. So for loop we have some statement, some condition, and then the expression. Means we have three different type of code in just one loop like for loop. We have some example in further slides. Here there we will check how the for loop is executed. So second, we also learn while loop. While when we maintain some kind of cases, we just use while day, any day equal to, yeah, any number 4 equal to, like Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, some weekdays. So we just define by Monday equal to 1, Tuesday by 2, Thursday by 3. We just inputting any number for that, and we just execute that code. Means when while conclude any number, we just input 5 with the help of while loop. So in there are seven cases, seven weekdays cases. If we have one, then means Monday there are some activity we having. So that means the output part of that case will be answered by only one section, one Monday section. There are further six sessions we will not use, we will not execute that kind of code. So we also some kind of any control statement with the while loop. Do means we have the limit. Like a do while loop is similar to while loop, but the loop is executed at least once. Minimum one time there will be a execution, even if the expression is initially false. That means if we have any, just we just have any condition, that is just when we entering the code just false. Just false means we will not execute the while section, but in do while we will conclude, we will execute at least one that expression also be false or true. The loop continue to repeat as long as the expression is true. Infinite loop is a loop that repeat indefinitely because it has no terminating condition. So that means if we have no terminating condition, that means the loop is never ending process. So we also know that, we also confirm that we require to terminate a loop after the condition is true or false. Nested loop, when we use two or more loops with the help of, like, a nested loop appear inside any other for loop, while or do while loop. We also use some other kind of loops in a single loop, so that means there are multiple loops, so that called a nested loop. A goto statement can create a loop by jumping backward a level. When we use goto word, that means just checking the goto statement, we just go through that code with the exact when we want to conclude, when we want to end these kind of execution. So there are some code for that in the C languages. A for loop is a control structure. We start from for loop. How the for loop is using in any kind of programming languages, there are some conditions. There are initialization, there are condition, there are increment or decrement operator, there are code block. Code block means the executable repeat section of that code. So here is we use int data. There are some data type which value is 100. We initialize another variable that name is I, and we check data 1 always is assigned with the help of data 1 plus the value of 10. So we just check a condition with the help of for loop. For loop is starting with the initialization. Initialization means we just initialize the value of I equal to 0. We want never be I value is less than 3. Whenever we just input ith value, just input value less than 3. After that we use increment operator. We all learn about the operators. There are increment, decrement, arithmetic, logical. Just there are bitwise operators. There are different kind of. So this is a increment operator. There are, if there is minus minus, that means it is a decrement operator. So just executing this code, first we initialize the value. So that means a for loop is a control structure used in programming language to execute a block of code repeatedly for a specified number of times. A specified number of time means there is a condition how many times this code is executed. When the value of I is greater than 3. So if the value, always checking with the help of this section, when we just start to output this section means for I value is equal to 0, I is less than equal to 3. Yes, I value 0, ith value is less than 3. Then we increment that value means this code when executed, the I value is increased by 1. So there is I value is 1. Then there also this code is executed, the data values are start from 10, 20, 30. So the conclude statement is working after 3 time of for loop execution. Start from 0, 1 or 2. If the value is 3, so that means not less than 3, so it is not executed. Then the input ith value or data value are incremented by 30. So initialization part, for loop, there are some conditions, there are some increment, decrement operators, some the initialization. So every time when we use in any programming languages, how the for loop structure is uses, there are for, after that we use parentheses means initialization, there are semicolons, conditions, there are semicolon, and increment or decrement. increment. It is just prototype. When we use help of the any programming language, there is an example of that. There are some condition part. This is a Boolean expressions, means it is just yes or no. It is just, it is proceed or not. It is true or false. It means it is not justifying, it is not assigning any value to any kind of expression. It's just checking this condition is true or false. Is this value is true, then it is executed the body part. If the value of this condition is not true, that means it's just out from that code and just print up this printing this kind of output. So last one, increment and decrement. This part of the loop is used to update the value of I, update the value of I to execute that code. Okay. Code block, this is the block of code that is executed repeatedly for each iteration of the loop. This code is called block. So when anyone asks how what is for loop, so we just write this syntax for that. And we have another example, there are some keywords we use in this for loop, so just writing all kind of part. So after that, we just know about the while loop, how the while loop is working. So a while loop is a control flow statement in programming languages that allow a set of instructions to be executed repeatedly as long as a particular condition is true. Means if the condition, they are always checking that condition. So if the condition is true, that means they exit from that part. So enter the loop test condition. If the test condition is true, so the body part is executed. If test condition is वापस repeatedly follow. If the value is false, then the loop is terminated. So while and there is a condition, means we use in for some three type of code block, but just where in while we just have a one condition. While the value of I is less than 5, so that means the body part of that code is executed. If the value is greater than 5 or equal to 5, that means the output will be. So loop terminate that time the value of I is equal to or increased by 1 for the initialized value. So this is the example of while loop. There is another one. Do while loop is a type of loop structure in programming language that allow a block of code to be executed repeatedly until a specified condition is met. So, loop and other types of loops. Such a while loop or a for loop, it is that the condition for the loop is checked at the end of each iteration instead of at the beginning. The basic syntax, you always write first your syntax, that then you write your example in the exam. You not just write the do keyword. You write these part. This is called a syntax for any kind of programming languages. When we use in C, you write the C type of code. You use in Java, you use any kind of language, just write that syntax. But this is the by default syntax. So the basic syntax of a do while loop is do, then the code block, then the condition. So if we know write the condition first and we start any code block with the help of do keyword, then we conclude with the while condition. So do keyword, there are all the kind of these references are right there. We have a example of this. We use break keyword in that. Okay, the break statement is used to permanently. That means whenever we write break keyword with the help of semicolon, that means when we write these kind of syntax, just mean that we will exit from that part. We will not include any code after the break keyword. So the break keyword is used to permanently terminate the execution of a loop or a switch statement. When a break statement is encountered, it causes the program to immediately exit the loop or switch statement and resume execution at the next statement following the loop or switch flow. The syntax for the break statement is just simple. We just write break keyword and then we use semicolon. We always use these syntax means if we left with the semicolon, that means we will not consider this break statement. So we just remember that always we write with the semicolon. It can be used inside a loop or a switch statement. Its affect is to the cause and immediate exit from that block of code. So whenever we use just break keyword means we will not conclude after part of that program. Here are the there is a example of that. So we use for loop initialize with value of I equal to 0 and the condition is I less than equal to 10 when we use increment. So if condition there is I equal to 5 means if we assign this is assignment operator. This is used to check the condition is part from there the break keyword. So code here will be executed until the value of I equal to 5. If the ith value is equal to 5, that means the break keyword is used. So terminating a switch statement, we also have another type of loop. There we use while and there are some condition. And we use in the while loop some cases. Some cases we are using with the help of switch keyword. Terminating a switch statement in a switch statement, a break statement can be used to terminate the execution of the switch block when a desired case is missed. So when we use condition, switch day, I also use the example of any weekdays like Monday, Tuesday. I just number them, just value day. If I use day instead of number two, so that means we just executed the part of two means Tuesday part, and then we write the break keyword. So that means is just execute case two. After that, it is concluded. If the condition is not matched, like day is not equal to in any day we are using in cases, so that means by default printf is printing the output invalid day. In this example, we if the value of the variable here is the variable is day. If we use day equal to 1 2 3 4, that means it just use the case 1. If we value here 1, if we use value 2, that means case 2. So how many cases we are using in this code? We just have a variable for that variable is checking the values of in this body part. This is code, and after that just break. If we not matches any from this code, that means we write the output by default section. If we write default, if we don't write default, that means we have no output, we have some error. So the corresponding statement will be executed and then the break statement will cause the switch block to terminate. If none of the cases matched, the default statement will execute and the switch block will terminate without a break statement. The continue. When we use break statement, if we use continue statement, there are both have different kind of meaning. The continuous statement is a C programming language works somewhat like the break statement. Instead of forcing termination, continue forces the next iteration of the loop. So if we use instead of break, we just write continue. That means we will not execute after that part and any part of that code will be executed. So it is not forcing that code to exit from that. It's just guiding. Just guiding. We will say if anyone just go and do that, and we politely request from that. So just meaning like that. Break and continue have same meaning, but he break keyword use strong objection, but continue is not forcing, just politely skipping the code in between, break and continue. Now, second part of this lecture is exception handling. So, exception handling is a mechanism in programming that allows error. Errors means if we write any syntax in wrongly, so that also called a error. If we not following the programming language principle, that means it is also error. And some unexpected event like when we programming, when we use database and our query part is not performing well, that means some kind of event will be caused to the termination of that program, and the program is not concluded, executed well. So these are called exception handling. We how we handle these kind of errors and these kind of events that causes our programming, that are called exceptions, and we how we handle that code, that called exception handling. So an exception is an object that represent an error or an other unusual condition that has occurred during the execution of program. When executed our program, there are some error, there are some unusual conditions that we are getting from the output part, so that means called exceptions. Exception handling provide a structured way. Structured way means we have some kind like a guideline, some step-by-step process to handle these kind of errors. And these kind of exception and respond to them appropriately means when we know if we conclude any statement, any numeric with divide by zero, so we have no answer, we have no output, we have an infinite answer, so it is exception by the human. So we just added these exception in our code. If user, if customer, if any programmer, in any developer, if inputting any value divide by zero, so that means we have an error. That also define you use these number in your expression. So exception handling provide a structured way to handle these exceptions and respond to the appropriately. Exception handling deals with these events to avoid the program or system crashing. So it is before we know how the event is occurred. If the event is disturbing our system means our computer. So that means it's also disturbing in our programming, and without this process, exception would disrupt the normal operation of that program. Exceptions occur for numerous reasons, including invalid user input. So that means user input any wrong information, any wrong instruction to the system. That means also is some exception. If we write not proper code, so that code errors. If the device, the system, the computer we are working, it's any device, any power failure, any kind of any failure, that means device failure. If we lose in between our session, in between our lecture, if my mic is not working, if my internet is not working, that means it is a loss of network connection, insufficient memory. When any type of data storage required more memory and in your system there are less memory, so that means it called a insufficient memory to run an application. If your RAM is not fulfilling the current application running, so it also a memory insufficiency, a memory conflict with another program. If you have many programs in currently working and your application required some more memory, it's also a kind of exception, a program attempting to divide by zero. Okay, so it is also a user error. So there are many kind of errors we know before the execution, so we can handle this kind of exception before the writing code, before the executing that kind of code. If we know, then we write therefore any kind of code to know what kind of error we make. If we don't know, then there is also a kind of checking we follow in any programming language. This called compile time error finding, runtime error finding. So that is another part. But if we know human make create an error in inputting part, your system make any error. So we handle these before the execution part. So how we handle these exception? With the help of throwing, with the help of catching, with the help of handling. There are three types to handle. So the key component of exception handling are throwing in exceptions, which mean when an error occurs, the program generates an exception object that contain information about the error. The exception is then thrown or raised. If that mean we know, we first know this is exception will occur by default, and we just ignore these kind of, we just throw, we just raise, which means it is passed to the nearest enclosing block of code that is capable of handling the exception. Catching an exception: when an exception is thrown, it must be caught or handled, which means we know this is an error, this is an exception, so we know how to handle this. So there is a catching block, there is a throw section in our code, there is a catch section in our block. So it is caught and handled by the appropriate exception handler. An exception handler is a block of code, so it is also a programming code that is specifically designed to handle a particular type of exception. If no exception handler is found, the program will terminate and error message will be displayed to the user. If we have nothing kind of this handling part, so the program will terminate, means the program is not executed, and there will be any kind of message we can write there to display for the output purpose. There is handling section and exception. Once an exception is caught, means it is throw, it is catch, it is now handling part. The exception handler can take corrective action, log the error, report the error to the user. The specific action taken will be depend on the nature of the error and the requirement of the program. So there are way to handle these kind of exception in writing, with the writing the code. If a program has a lot of statement, an exception happens halfway. Halfway means it is not executed properly through its execution. The statement after the exception do not execute. So after this exception, the code after that part is not executed, not entertained more, and the program crashes it. Exception handling help ensure this does not happen when an execution error occur. Exception handling can catch and throw exceptions. If a detecting function in a block of code, we use these kind of theoretical part in a programming code where we use catch block, we use throw block, so they help us to prevent these kind of exception, these kind of error. So code cannot deal with an anomaly. Anomaly means we not having one or more these errors. The exception is only one kind of error that makes effect in our program. The exception is thrown to a function that can handle the exception. A catch statement is a group of statement. This means this is also a code to catch keyword also used to handle this kind of. So all this theoretical part we write in programming code. We all know computer is not just learning, just inputting these kind of sentences. The computer understand only true and false values. There are 0 or 1. This is called a binary. So we write these human kind of languages with the help of any programming languages in the English like code with the help of compiler, interpreter. There are many kind of tools we are using. Case parameter define the specific type of exception that is thrown. Exception handling is useful for dealing with the exception that cannot be handled locally. Instead of showing an error status in the program, the exception handler transfers the control to where the error can be handled. A function can throw exception or can choose to handle exception. So there are many functions. Function means also a block code. There are many line of code we are using with the help of a main code. This is called as a function. Error handling code can also be separated from normal code with the use of try block. So we handle these kind of statement with the help of try and catch block. So in our programming code, we use try block, we use catch block to handle these kind of. Try block can help programmers to categorize exception objects. So when we write try block in our programming, we also define what kind of exception object we included in the try block and how we handle this block in our programming. So there are different type of exception that can be raised. So we just confirming what type of the exceptions, how we handle them, how the definitions of exceptions. So here is the some common type of exception, means common type of error we can made in our programming. So there is first type of there is first type of exception, means arithmetic exception. This exception is raised when arithmetic operation produce an error. So it's the term arithmetics also define that when we use any arithmetic operations, like we use addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. So if we divide by 0, so there will be a overflow or underflow condition. Overflow means the value of the input part is considered overflow, is not properly answered properly, giving output. So there is another part of exception, that name is null pointer. So when we just you have any question part about what is exception handling, so just define the what is the exception handling and what kind of common exception are there. So you always remember these the important exception in your code. So there is common exceptions in any programming languages. First one is arithmetic. When we write any arithmetic operations and we divide there by 0, so there are some kind of error. This called a arithmetic exception. There are null pointer. You know about the pointer. Pointer is referencing the address of any kind of memory. So if we not use correct reference, correct address number, so that means null pointer exception. So this exception is raised when an attempt makes to access a null object reference. Array index out of bound means when we use array is the same data type and continuous memory allocation, but we use out of that boundary, that means it is indexed from out of bound. This exception is raised when an attempt is made to access an array element outside the bound of the array. Means we have used only 10 element of an array. We require the number of 12 number of array, but we don't have the bound of that array. That boundary is only 10. So that means this is an error. This is an exception. That name is array index of bound exception. We just write this name, these in our code with the help of try and catch block. So whenever you write in Java, in C++, you all use these kind of exceptions. There are there are illegal argument exception. This exception is raised when an argument passed to a method or constructor is invalid or inappropriate. You all know about constructor. Constructor is a object, a function, it's called itself. When we use constructor, that means we initialize the code second time, third time with the help of constructor. In the C languages, in C++, there are only constructor in C language, there are destructor in another languages. So you just learn all these things, then you know illegal argument exception is what. So there is also a class and object in object-oriented programming is a part of C++. So this kind of exception in handle in object-oriented type of programming languages. We just read all the general applications, all general exception in all programming language. We not specified in only one languages. Okay. So there is a database related. There is a input output exception. This exception is read when an input or output operation fail. When we use printf scanf system.out.println in Java, there is C in and C out in C++. So the different kind of input and output operation, if not properly handled, that means is fail. And that type of exception is called a IO exception. There is a SQL exception. This is a SQL exception means this if we write a query to retrieve any kind of data from our database. So if the data is not fulfilled that query, so that also kind of exception is called SQL exception. If we initialize any program, we execute, if the execution time any error we find, that called a runtime exception. This is a general purpose exception that can be used to represent a wide range of unexpected exceptional conditions such as null pointer reference, arithmetical errors, and other runtime errors. So now we know what kind of loops we are using in a programming language: for loops, do while loops, switch, do, continue. So there are many kind of loops. How we use in kind of loops, what is the syntax of that loops, what the use in our programming that loops. Yes, just a minute. I will allow all of you in a discussion. So just 2 minutes. After that, we know what kind of exception handling, what the common type of exception are in our programming languages. So how we use, why we important taking these exception in our programming language. If you have any kind of any discussion, any topic you not just take in your mind, you don't know, you want ask more about that, you just write in chat, please. Last previous also the looping type of session, when we just knowing that what kind of operator, what kind of operand we are using, and this section we just knowing about the looping, how the looping help in our programming. With the help of loop, we not need to write code in many multiple way. So just instead using that code, we just write some looping structure. Looping structures mean we use ऐसा कोड जो अपन को बार बार मल्टीपल टाइम्स राइट करने से अपन को एक्सक्लूड कर ले. सो अपन जस्ट एक पार्ट लिखा स्विच और अपने केस बना दिए 10 12, बट जस्ट इफ द कोड सेटिस्फाइड, वो अपनी उस स्विच कंडीशन को अगर सेटिस्फाइड करेगा, दैट मीन वी जस्ट जंप ऑन दैट कोड ओनली, वी नॉट चेकिंग ऑल काइंड ऑफ कोड वन बाय वन. Anywhere you just write some, we need some theoretical question of PPL, so you all know kind of these questions, just write on Google. Google will help you. We will also help you. We are just concluding these papers in our LMS also, so wait for that. This subject is totally theoretical. You need to know what kind of principle we taking in our programming languages. Whenever we learn, you all learn in C languages. Yes, Jai. आप लोग अगर रेज हैंड करोगे तो मैं आपको अनम्यूट करके आपको वर्बली भी आपके क्वेश्चंस लूंगा. तो प्लीज किसी को डाउट है तो जस्ट ना रेज हैंड करे, मैं आपको अनम्यूट करता हूँ. ओके. यस, इंपॉर्टेंट है एग्जाम के लिए. एक्सेप्शन हैंडलिंग क्या होता है, लूप भी आता है. लूप के लिए एग्जांपल आता है कि यूज राइट ए प्रोग्राम विद द हेल्प ऑफ व्हाइल लूप. सो आपको व्हाइल लूप को पहले डिफाइन करना पड़ेगा, देन व्हाइल लूप का एक एग्जांपल लिखना पड़ेगा. आपको आ सकता है फॉर लूप क्या होता है, और फॉर लूप के एग्जांपल के साथ उसको एक्सप्लेन करो. तो फॉर लूप को आपको लिखना है, उसका सिंटेक्स लिखना है, फिर उसको एक एग्जांपल के साथ आपको एक्सप्लेन करना है. सेम एक्सेप्शन क्या होता है और एक्सेप्शन हैंडलिंग क्यों यूज में ली जाती है, तो ये भी क्वेश्चन है कि एक्सेप्शन क्या होता है. इफ अपन को पता है वो एरर हो सकती है, उसको अपन कोड में यूज करें और उसका कोड लिख के अपन आइडेंटिफाई कर ले अगर रन कर रहे हैं, तो दैट इज एक्सेप्शन. एंड दिस एरर को अपन कैसे, ये कृतिका जी एग्जाम के बारे में आपको बाद में बताया जाएगा. अभी केवल सेशन से रिलेटेड आपको कोई क्वेरी है वो आप बताइए. जो चल रहा है उससे रिलेटेड कोई प्रॉब्लम है, कुछ टॉपिक है जो आपको नहीं समझ में आया, उसके बारे में आप क्वेरी कीजिए। अगर नहीं है तो सेशन कंक्लूड कर दें। यस जाहिर। If anyone have any doubt regarding these loop, these exceptions, please write, please। बता दिया ना कि क्वेश्चन ऐसे आ सकता है। यस बता दिया कि एक्सेप्शन क्या होता है, कि अपन को पता है कोई एरर हो सकती है, उसको अपन को कोड में कैसे रखना है, अगर आप उसको रन करें तो अपन को पता चले कि ये काइंड ऑफ एरर अपने कोड में है। उसको अगर वो कोड में एरर अपन रन कर दिया किसी प्रोग्राम को, फिर पता चले, उसको अपन ठीक नहीं कर सकते। लेकिन अपन को पहले पता है कि ऐसी एरर हो सकती है, उसको कैसे हैंडल करना है। लाइक अपना सिस्टम कुछ फेल होने की कंडीशन में हो या कुछ कुछ सफरिंग कर रहा हो, तो दैट मीन अपना सिस्टम कुछ रेस्पॉन्स नहीं कर रहा है, तो अपन उसको कंक्लूड कर सकते हैं। तो जब आप सी लैंग्वेज या सी प्लस प्लस सीखोगे तो वहाँ ट्राई और केच ब्लॉक बनाओगे। ट्राई में लिखोगे कि ये प्रॉब्लम हो सकती है, केच में मतलब उसको कैसे रिजॉल्व करना है। वो आप प्रोग्राम में, एक प्रोग्राम जैसे आप अभी लिखते हो, हेलो वर्ल्ड का प्रोग्राम लिखा, तो उसमें आपने एक ट्राई कैच ब्लॉक बना दिया कि हेलो प्रिंट नहीं हुआ, तो आपको उस वाले ब्लॉक को कैसे एग्जीक्यूट करना है। ओके, सो अपन सेशन को एंड कर रहे हैं। नो वी एंडिंग दिस सेशन। ओके।